Praise be to God. Today's Bible reading portion is taken from Exodus chapter 29, 30 and 31. In yesterday's chapter, we had seen on how God instructs Moses to ordain the priest in Israel. We saw on how Aaron and his sons were ordered to be ordained as the priest in Israel. Now in chapter 29, verses 1 to 37, Moses was asked to take a bull, 2 rams, unleavened bread, cakes, wafers, and bring them to the tabernacle, which is the tent of meeting. Aaron and his sons were to wash themselves with water before dressing in this special priestly clothes described in Exodus chapter 28. Aaron was also to be anointed with oil, and his sons were to place their hands on the head of the bull before it was killed, and the bull's blood was to be put on the horns of the bronze altar. One of the rams was to be sacrificed as a food offering on the altar, and the other ram was to be killed and some of its blood placed on Aaron and his sons and their clothing to make them as holy. Certain portions of the ram were to be put in Aaron's hands and waved before the Lord as a wave offering. Aaron and his sons were to take the ram's breast and thigh, boil them and eat them with the remaining unleavened bread at the entrance of the tabernacle. This whole priest ordination would last for 7 days. Also, in addition to the sacrifices listed above, every day of their ordination, a bull was to be sacrificed as a sin offering and the altar was to be purified. In verses from 38 to 46, now we can see few daily sacrifices offered by the priest. Now the priests were to offer 2 lambs every day on the altar, first in the morning and the second at twilight. These lambs were to be sacrificed with a 10th measure of fine flour for a drink offering. Also, the tabernacle would be the place where God would meet with the Israelites, and it was to be consecrated as the holy place, which we saw in the previous chapter. Moving to chapter 30, again it goes into the details on the altar. Now, verses from 1 to 10, it talks about the altar of incense, where Moses was to make an altar for burning incense and put it in the tabernacle in front of the veil that separated the holy place and the most holy place. Again, Aaron was to offer incense on it every morning and evening. Once a year, Aaron was to make atonement on the altar. From these offerings, verses from 11 to 16, it moves to the census offerings, where Moses made a census of the Israelites, where he collected half shekel offering from each person over the age of 20. Next is the bronze washing basin. Moses was to have a bronze basin constructed which would sit between the tabernacle and the bronze altar in the courtyard. Again, Aaron and other priests were required to wash before offering sacrifices on the altar or entering the tabernacle. Verses 22 to 38, the oil of the anointing and the tabernacle incense. Now Lord told Moses to take liquid myrrh, cinnamon, aromatic cane, cassia, and olive oil to make a holy anointing oil. And this oil was only to be used on the priest and the holy things, and it was not to be recreated for any other purposes. Now this chapter concludes the whole details on how the altar was to be built and what other things Moses was been instructed by God. Moving to chapter 31, here we can see 2 additional characters being introduced. We have Bezalel and Oholiab, who were the 2 men who were chosen to help in the construction of the tabernacle and the holy items within it. God told Moses he was to give 2 men with special ability to build the unique items required for tabernacle, and they would be empowered with God's Spirit. Bezalel and Oholiab and the men who assisted them, they would be responsible for making the Ark of the Testimony, the mercy seat, the furnishing for the tent, the table for the bread of the presence, the gold lampstand, the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offering, also known as the bronze altar, the washing basin, the garments of the priest, the anointing oil, and the tabernacle incense. We saw all of these things in the previous chapter. In chapter 31, verses 12 to 18, next the Lord commanded the Israelites to observe the Sabbath day every 7th day of the week. Now, the Sabbath observance was to sanctify the people, which means that they are setting them apart as holy, and it was to be observed very significantly. The Sabbath principle had its foundation in creation, as we all know, that God created the world in 6 days and He rested on the 7th. In total, when God finished speaking all these things to Moses, He gave him 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone written by God Himself. The day of rest, which is the Sabbath, is a statement of faith that God governs our life and that it is ultimately He is the one who gives us success in our work. So this chapter concludes by saying the importance of the Sabbath day law. Chapters are very important on how God instructs Moses on the altar, the minute details in the furnishing, where He chose 2 people additionally to help in building the tabernacle, and He concludes by saying the importance of the Sabbath day and the laws pertaining to it. These are the chapters for today. I hope God speaks to all of you all. Thanks once again for listening, and God bless.